Thanks. All right. We haven't had a lot of discussion on like what the I don't know what is he what exact point was it that you took issue with quantum?
So I guess you start talking about logic and the different varieties of logic, and sort of like the idea that everything comes down to utility, or something's usefulness. And I guess the idea is that that still carries a lot of metaphysical implications, um, even just based on the idea that there is something that has like a uh, motivation towards utility, um, or that like utility is something being cared about by an individual or something like this. I wanted to kind of get into that because I think that there's actually some. Like, you could take it a couple different ways, right? Like, there's probably a few different varieties of metaphysics that you could apply to that.
Yeah. Okay. So
But maybe there are some like necessary like similarities between those or something like that.
Yeah. So in short, you see how I wield logic and abstractions in a non-realist fashion, and my only justification for it is something that I call utility, and you say that what I call utility still is still has baggage that could be metaphysical or something else. Is that basically what you're saying?
Yeah.
Okay. So I don't like being dismissive of entire views. So I just want to point out a sort of divorce between certain ways of thinking here. I am somewhat Kantian in how I think about metaphysics. And I don't want to go down the ism rabbit hole. So I want to explain what that is. I think that, basically, in order to have an analytically rigorous metaphysics, we have to have what he called the synthetical a priori proposition, which is a proposition where the subject, there's a subject, and that there's also new information in the predicate. Like, it's not like, a bachelor is an unmarried man. That's almost tautological. We have to say that particular bachelor has $5 in his pocket, and we have to be able to figure it out a priori through calculation. That is what Kant said would constitute a rigorous metaphysics. Principles that we didn't have to go out and collect data for and plug it into an equation. We do pure calculation, and we figure out empirical facts about the world, basically. Synthetical a priori proposition. So
wouldn't the idea be that the calculation is that you start out with that synthetic a priori, and then from there you can calculate everything else, right? Is that the idea?
I believe that is the idea, and most people think that he just set the bar ridiculously high. It's kind of a fool's errand, but it at the same time it highlights a certain divorce between semantic form and the substance that justifies the semantic form, or it highlights a divorce between the map and the territory, is another way to say it. And so, in short, I would say that if we were looking at our systems of math and logic as maps, and phenomena as the territory, the only justification of the map is not whether it maps one-to-one to the territory, whether the person using the map got where they wanted to go. Maybe you think they went to a dumb place. Maybe you think the map is drawn dumb. But if a person got the map and they're like, yeah, this is a good one, I like it, I'm going to use it next time, then to me, that's fine. And I don't think that says anything metaphysical.
Yeah, for me, I think like I've actually, so we were talking about pessimistic idealism, I think, briefly the other day, right? I've talked to him a few times on this. I get into like sort of a representationalist view of like consciousness in like my metaphysics. So I've expressed to him that same idea before, that like what we perceive, like our perceptual states, are like a map. And and whether or not it actually describes the territory accurately is kind of determined by whether or not you get where you're trying to go.
Yeah.
Which in a sense could be like something, you could say it's survival, or you could say all kinds of different things for that. But I guess, so, I mean, you know, the utility aspect of it is going to presuppose like at least somebody who is trying to accomplish some goal, right? Or something like that.
Yeah. Yep.
So yeah, and I think like with Kant, it's more like the phenomenal is mapping like a noumenal, or is he saying that the noumenal is totally disconnected, and so like metaphysics is sort of a moot point?
Let's see. Those might be separate things he talked about in different topics. Someone who has like studied the complete works of Kant might know how to connect those dots a little bit better. But he was pointing out that we have these different. If you accept the synthetic a priori distinction, then he was saying that he was just pinpointing what kind of proposition would be a metaphysical one. Let's see. I mean, this does seem to be relevant to the fact that the noumenon seems to be forever beyond our reach, so to speak. But even so, yeah. Sorry, I'm a little bit lost at this point.
Oh no, that's fine. I mean, I don't really think that there's anything like ultra specific that I could pin you to based on the things that you say, but I do think that, I mean, like, how do you get to, like, do you believe anything about like the philosophy of mind, or like how like what's the priority between like mind and the rest of the world, or like is there actual physical stuff there? Like, do you think that's all just utility too? Do you think that
yeah, I can answer that. I'll build you my philosophy from bottom up. So if we just, through doubt and skeptically remove everything and say, oh, maybe we're in a simulation, brain in a vat, whatever, we go all the way to solipsism, right? Brain in the vatism. And then we, to me, the solipsist, or the person who accepts the cogito, doesn't go far enough. They still are fixated on monads or things to hold on to, like their golem guarding their precious. So instead of saying I think therefore I am, in my opinion, as soon as I say I think therefore I am, that's another thing that could be in the simulation. We do recognize that we seem to be aware, but there's almost nothing to talk about our awareness. It's almost like non-cognitive, so to speak. But all the other things that we are doubting as part of the simulation, the brain in the vat world that we're dreaming up, whatever you want to call it, those are things that we can draw categorical lines around certain phenomena. We can connect dots. We can map it according to whether it predictably, I don't want to get into tautologies, whether it predicts phenomena consistently or reliably. So it's solipsism, basically, but even without the I think, therefore I am, it's just, okay, we seem to be aware. The reason we say I think, therefore I am is because I have this sense of reality in my awareness, but there's almost nothing to talk about with it. It's non-cognitive. People who talk too much about that are getting into some woo territory real quick. And so instead of talking about that, just realize, okay, so there's no point trying to find phenomena out there in the simulation, but I can draw categories around it. I can make definitions, and if they're reliable, I can get stuff that I want from it. And so I think there's no point in seeking reality in phenomena. And for that reason, we should not handle our devices with too much care, as if they're, something special. So the two bodies of knowledge that we would generate after we've established that solipsism is not really worth talking about, are like deduction and induction. Are we going to take items and synthesize them into a general conclusion, or are we going to take items and carve down at them to get the best, most refined conclusion? And that seems to be a theme in how we how we deal with our information. Are we going to break things into the parts, or are we going to synthesize them into a whole? And all of these process, the whole idea of making parts into a whole, all of that's just another abstraction we come up with that ultimately doesn't make any sense. And same thing with analyzing things into their parts. That's how I see it.
Interesting.
And I would say this, unless I'm making some leap or have some blind spot I haven't accounted for, I would say that since I start with solipsism and I just overlay pragmatism on top of it, the pragmatism isn't making any metaphysical claim beyond solipsism. So this whole way of thinking, in my opinion, should inherit the same unassailability as solipsism.
Yeah, I mean, I would guess, like, if you're gonna, it seems the way that you're moving there, though, would allow you to then start reasoning in ways that you could come to know other things that have metaphysical implications also, right? Or, like, if there's no, I don't know. It seems like you're saying there's no facts of the matter about anything, which is, like, there's an epistemic question of how you know something, right? There's the way that you can be sure, or something like that, or like in like incorrigible beliefs, like you can't doubt them, or something like this. Like, but I mean, once you start reasoning, it seems like you can circle back. So I think that's where you get into like externalist justifications of certain like knowledge claims and things like that. It's like after you've applied reasoning to things, like even to say like, oh well, you could be wrong about it, like that's fine. But I still don't know if it makes sense to say like, well, it's all just utility with no implications as to, like, it seems to me that like I popped into the world at a certain point, and that I didn't just create the world like from my mind. I mean, it's not like impossible, but based on other things that I believe and accept from reasoning about them, I start to get a certain picture of the way that the world is working around me. And I don't know that that's necessarily sort of like an unnoble, or what is the word, ignoble thing to do, to say that there's no, like, there's no conclusions that we can start to draw or like lean into, or even just sort of be driven towards by reasoning about certain things around us.
Okay. Can you consolidate that?
Yeah, so I guess the idea is like once you've started reasoning deductively and inductively, like you were saying, you don't think that can circle back around towards like metaphysics at all?
Okay, so I actually think that it could, but it may not give you the exhaustive absolute metaphysics that you want. Like, just as you and I have talked about Tarski a couple times, we have to lay out the truth outside of the system, but it's still good to have an idea of truth. But it's also important to have the knowledge that we're going to run out of synonyms to define truth according to, what is truth? That which corresponds to reality. Okay, what's reality? And we can keep going regressively, or we can circle back around and be like, reality is the true stuff, or we can just be like, okay, we're going to work with this idea called truth. If you have to ask too many questions about it, then, that's another issue. We can't prove it, but we're going to use it to do all this cool logic stuff and maybe write some code. And then there might be other alternative models of truth, and that's fine. So it's the fixation with the absolute that excludes all alternatives that, to me, is the naive pursuit. So after we've built up these systems that I'm talking about, you can turn around and you can make metaphysics. But just as there are many different species of logic, there might be a whole bunch of different species of metaphysics. This is something I'm okay with, but like our friend Canadian Bacon Catholic, he's probably not okay with it. Theists, probably not okay with it. People who are looking for a monad, they don't like that. They want the holy grail of philosophy. And so To and when you look for that kind of thing, I don't know, it seems to really complicate people's minds philosophically once they really decide, you know what, all these people in philosophy, they're idiots. I'm smart. I'm going to find the objective truth. It seems like so many people have decided to do that, and in my view, it's totally futile. So yeah, that's what I think about that.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. So you think we could basically go as far as to some conception of like a metaphysical framework, like in physics, like, okay, here's a concept of like the way everything is operating that we can actually use to make like accurate predictions. And so like that's something valuable, but like it's probably much deeper than that. There's probably much more going on than like is captured by that or something to that effect, right?
Yeah. So let's say you have this model in physics that predicts things, and maybe there's something deeper going on, and maybe it's beyond our grasp. But if it is, I don't know, let's say that it's something in astrophysics and it's helping people do whatever they want with satellites or whatever, it doesn't matter. You know? It works.
Yeah, I can get that. It seems like there's a, I mean, there's a way in which you could say something like, you know, like Newton's laws, like take like F equals ma is something that for what we experience day to day seems to apply pretty broadly, right? But like some other formulation, like if I said like F equals ma over 2, it's like, well, that's actually wrong. That doesn't generate predictions properly. It seems to me like in a sense, like there's a way to reference states of affairs. I mean, that's kind of how you do like empirical, evaluation. I tend to think that like even if we can't get to like an ultimate metaphysics, that like there is some way that things are, and maybe it could be described in a variety of different ways. But it is that way, I guess, in whatever that is. And I think we do all try to approach it. I think what you're doing is sort of like it's an inward reflection on the way that we think about it. And you're sort of saying like, hey, you're not going to get where you're trying to go unless you have more of an open mind at the roots of like looking out at the world, I guess. Which I respect that. I think that makes sense. Because I think you can get like at the early stages of inquiry, if you are too invested in one thing that you think you're going to find, you might miss something else. So yeah, I do think it's valuable, but I would imagine you'd agree with me that like there probably is some way that things are, and like we all tend to have biases about what those things. Even if we take your route and we try to say as much as possible we're not going to have like any biases, I feel like they're still there. But.
Oh, sure, yeah. So as far as biases go, I think it's important not to hide our biases. We can know they're there, but if we lie about not having biases, that just means they're going to come out unconsciously all the time. Like, you can say, oh, I have this bias. I know it's not objective, but this is my affinity. I know that the alternative is not wrong. It's just this is, the kind of music I listen to. I don't have a justification for it. There's no fault in that. That's better than the person who says, oh, no. I know that all music is a matter of opinion, and therefore I don't listen to any music. It's all the same to me. And so,
yeah.
So, like I can tell you, the people who I was raised by are, conservatives, and, I'm not a conservative, but like those personalities click with me more. I'm more of a, I don't give a fuck about people's feelings type thing. That's, but I know that there are probably plenty of decent arguments from the left for why they do what they do. But it's just not my affinity. I don't have a good reason for it. I don't say I'm on the good guy squad. I'm not a voter. It's just important for people to not lie about their alignments, even the subconscious ones. So that being said, it's less about being. I want to make sure that we're not pitching a naive middle ground centrism on all issues across the board. It's that certain things may be more useful in certain contexts, but it's important at all times, I would say, to know that the ideas we're using have no reality. Otherwise, you can misunderstand them. And just look at all the people who try to use logic to shoehorn their ideologies into the objective. The laws of logic come from the mind of God, or this, that. We've heard it all. If you know the laws of logic are made up, then you won't misuse them. The same with math. Where do the integers come from? What are they made of? Dude, you made them up. Use them, and then shut up about it.
Right. Yeah, I would agree with a lot of, in the context of like most things, they're just concepts.
Yeah.
I guess for me, it's like, numbers are one thing to point to that you could say like, yeah, dude, they're just tools. They're like these conceptual tools. But then when somebody says something like the sun or like an atom, for me, it's like, I know that that's just a concept in a similar regard, but I also think it's something that's like actually there. Now, I might not understand how the inside of the sun works, but I see it every day. And I have some reasons to believe like that it actually is 93 million miles away, and that it's undergoing, fusion in the core and producing heavy elements and these sort of things. And all that can just be sort of just kind of put in a bin labeled like, this is a model of reality. This is not actually reality.
Yeah.
But it seems like you're throwing it, when you do that you're throwing it in the same bin as like, the sun's actually the flat earth like sun that's like a spotlight and it's going around and it's and it's like, oh, that's just another model. It's like this one just is like seems to make better predictions, but they're both like equally not real, something like that. It seems like when you get something that is more explanatory as a model, more predictive, and then once you have multiple things that are doing both of those equally, then which one has is simpler, right? Those seem to be the tools that we use to sort of say something has a higher degree of correspondence with reality or something like this. It's hard for me to let go of that way of looking at it, I guess.
Okay, so let me explain. So then, how does my non-realist approach? How does it justify not taking a flat Earth model over a globetard science bro model? So again,
I can see how you could still say, obviously the flat Earth model sucks and it's not a good model or something like this. But
yeah, well, after we've built induction, I'm just placing empirical science as we know it under the umbrella of induction, and whatever probabilistic cumulative case there is for the sun being a sphere that we orbit around would go under that. And the question is never whether it's real. The question is how it works for us. So like for me, again, with usefulness, I take like almost a marketplace approach, kind of similar to relative price value. There's not a set objective price for apples. The price of apples is what I'm willing to pay for it. And so if someone wants to charge me $10 for an apple, then for me, I'm not buying that apple. And in this case, that apple was not worth $10. But then the next chump that comes along and pays $10, okay, it was worth $10 for them. And so for me, usefulness is like a marketplace dynamic where it's useful if a transaction took place, and then it's even more useful if I repeatedly make that transaction. So if the map worked, got me across the territory, and then I decide to rely on that map again, then its usefulness is really becoming a thing. Now, regarding how this ties into like the sun not being flat Earth, I'm going to going to borrow my friend Omni's thought experiment that he sort of put together using the Sorites paradox. So we all know about the heap of sand problem, right? So how many grains of sand do I have to lay down before there's a heap? And then, so now you have, once you realize that there's no such thing as a heap of sand and that a heap of sand is not real, now you've earned your philosophy toga and you say, there's no such thing as a heap of sand. Okay, that's fine. Now a tractor comes up with a huge load of sand that it's about to dump on your head. And then I say, hey, I think there's about to be a heap of sand that is big enough to maybe hurt you that is about to be dropped on you. If you're still philosophizing at that point and saying, no, there's no such thing as a heap, then you may be ignoring what is useful or practical. And so at that point, maybe now you believe in a heap ad hoc for these purposes. And so,
I mean, I would say there is something like a heap. It just has like fuzzy boundaries. It's not strictly defined, something like that.
Yeah, that's fine. But
like there could be an actual heap. I mean, it doesn't seem to be a problem. Like I think the problem with the Sorites paradox is very interesting. It applies like broadly in a lot of ways, especially when people want to start drawing lines between things that don't have hard boundaries, which could be everything, you know?
Yeah, to me, that's what I bust out. I bust out the Sorites paradox and Theseus' ship when I want to make a case for nominalism.
And they work well, but that doesn't. I guess nominalism doesn't necessarily entail like anti-realism, because you could still say that there are things there that we're naming, and that like the boundaries on our naming conditions are just sort of sloppy, and that in reality, like things aren't separate from each other in the way that they are in our language.
Yeah. Okay. Real quick. I want to stay on track with that. Okay. So again, we established there's not a heap, but then suddenly, in a certain context, when the tractor is about to dump the sand on your head, suddenly the idea of a heap becomes useful to you. Even if you turn around after you step out of the way, and the heap doesn't land on you, then you go back to thinking there was no heap. Well, okay, in the moment, the idea of the heap was useful, right? So that's the sort of thing that my friend Omni came up with to illustrate how there's a certain point where usefulness becomes apparent of something. So this is what I'm saying about like the idea of the sun. Okay, we can say, we can Theseus' ship and Sorites paradox, all definitions and any categories. But if we look at the inductive case and empirical evidence for the sun being a sphere and not flat, and that's or
made of cheese or whatever.
Yeah. I mean, off the top of my head, I actually can't come up with immediately a reason why it's a more useful thing to believe, but I'm sure probably someone can. So you see what I'm saying? There's probably someone who's got like a the empirical facts already goes like, oh yeah, this is more useful for people sending satellites up or astronauts or whatever. So yeah.
Well, in the case of like flat Earth, you can definitely see how it's more. So if everybody believed in flat Earth, like even if it was somehow an equivalent model, nominalism is a type of anti-realism. Yeah, with respect to certain ideas. Yeah, nominalism is, both terms kind of can apply in different domains, unless you're saying like global nominalism or global anti-realism, something like that. But so with something like the flat Earth, like even if you could like have a model that made equivalent predictions and was just as useful, but like it's based on a metaphysic where the Earth is flat, right? People wouldn't have a desire to send satellites into space because that comes along with thinking that space doesn't exist and there's a dome there and things like this, right?
Yeah.
And so it can even I guess value is something that I wanted to discuss too with connection to that, because that sort of points at it. It's like somebody with that view would never have this value of wanting to explore this domain that they think isn't there.
Okay, sorry, what do you mean?
So it's like a flat earther, they just start with the idea that space isn't real, right?
Yeah.
So they're not going to have a drive to go and explore space or anything like that. And maybe like on the Earth, they're making all the same predictions that had been made by people who did believe in space, but they lack this value of trying to, or a pursuit value, right, of trying to go and explore. And I think that comes back into the utility idea, where utility would be driven by whatever it is that you value. And that's sort of how you get your goal direction for utility. And I guess, like, somebody who is sophisticated, probably more than me, would start asking you about how you account for value. And you'd have to put that somewhere in like a metaphysical account. Or because it seems odd to point at that and also say that is just a concept when it's sort of the input to the utility idea.
There's got to be a certain, if you're saying it's metaphysical or grounded in metaphysics, there's got to be this issue, this point where we go from phenomena to crossing over into a concept. If you're saying that it becomes an input into our framework of ideas,
because I mean, you could just say utility. You could just put it on utility then, and say that that's also just a concept. So it's like, what is the utility of utility? Like, you know what I mean? Like, but I'm trying to get a level behind that to kind of get out in front of like a potential answer to it, because it seems to me that utility is just based in value.
Yeah. So to me, if we're trying to pin down any, to say that utility or usefulness or the values of our systems has grounding in metaphysics, that's a similar task as establishing the fundamentals or the rules of logic as having establishment in metaphysics. I'm not really seeing the difference.
I'm sorry, one more time. I kind of missed. How is it similar to the laws of logic?
If like saying that utility or our values by which we judge a system, saying that those have groundings in metaphysics, to me is similar or kind of the same, the same thing, not literally the same thing, but the same issue as saying that the laws of logic or the axioms of logic have a grounding in metaphysics.
I see them a little differently, right? Because I think that those are still in sort of a hierarchical chain. They're still downstream of value, right? Because you're saying, like, you can settle on different laws of logic depending on value. So I guess the idea is something like you're putting, aren't you putting existential like import onto value to say something about utility? Like, if we're just supposed to think in terms of utility, then it would seem like you're saying, like, well, there's some instantiation of values, right? Or things that have values.
Not so much. See, this kind of comes down to whether someone's going to accuse my idea of utility as being vague. So if I think that if you ask me questions about what utility is, and then I decide to go refine it and maybe like some of these people actually come up with units of value called like utils. Okay, I don't know if you've seen that, but that's.
Well, I think that's silly.
Yeah,
that's adding something onto utility, like that it can be like divisibly quantified.
Yeah, so
or something.
Yeah, so to me, it runs into the same issues. Like, okay, what is truth? That which corresponds to reality. How long are we going to go? How many synonyms are we going to come up with? Or are you just going to like be cool with talking about truth? It's the same thing with utility. If utility is vague to somebody, go ahead and reject it. Come up with some other standard to talk about. The same way we could with truth. But I don't see the productivity in regressively coming up with synonyms for it.
Oh no, and I get that, and I don't mean it as being vague.
But I understand that at the beginning of every system, when we decide to stop being regressive, then we were stuck with a term that is going to be vague. Just like how if we, look up all the words in a dictionary, we're going to realize it's circular at some point, or that there are just, some bedrock words that, aren't defined in terms of anything prior. So, yeah.
Yeah. I don't think it's I don't think it's necessarily circular like when you look in the dictionary in some sense, because like each word, well, that's kind of going off into the weeds a little bit, but I guess the idea is something like each person has utility, right? Or so, right? Are we gonna go? Can we speak in terms of there being like multiple people applying this
Sure.
idea?
Yeah.
Okay. So for one person, a utility is something, and then for another person, they're gonna have the same thing that you're calling utility, but theirs might be different. And then what I would say is that it's based on their what they value or what they place value on as like accounting for the difference in their perspective on utility, right? Something like that. I think okay. Yeah, so I guess I'm just trying to get into that. That's why I said it's like an input. It's not really circular in the sense that it just means the same thing, because you could say that like roughly equivalently, like this person has finds utility in this thing, and then this other person finds like a roughly equivalent amount of utility in this other thing.
Yeah.
It could be different. And so I guess like, yeah, would you see why value would be like upstream from utility there?
No, I'm sorry, I don't. I just see us as like stacking another turtle at the bottom of a stack of turtles when, maybe we don't need to, in my opinion. Like, already, utility is going too far, in my opinion. Let me tell you what utility is like. People say, oh, you think logic is made up? Why would, so what is your justification for using it? It's like, oh, I think it's useful. To me, you could swap out useful with, oh, I think it's justified, or I think it works. I think it's true. You can swap it out with any of these, but it's just something I point to justify using logic to sort of help people understand how I look at it.
Yeah. What do you do when you? So this is just an aside question. I'm curious if you've gotten pushback on when you bring up many valued logics and paraconsistent logics. Like, do you get pushback on their usefulness?
Yeah.
I'm not really familiar with like where they're applied. Do you have like counterexamples for like where they end up being used?
Yeah. So there are there are plenty of natural language like in natural language. Sometimes we use expressions that are contradictory, and we sort of realize for the sake of communication that they are not a problem. Like I like to point to that the quote, it was the best of times, it was the worst of times. Or if I ask you, is philosophy a waste of time, you might answer yes and no.
Yeah,
I mean, it's really simple. The examples are under our noses,
because I think like that's how Wittgenstein gets in, or what is it, even before him on sense, right? Like the idea of sense, of the way that something could not be a contradiction because of the sense that it's being used.
Okay. I am actually not aware of that. So
yeah, I think it's called, what is it? Yeah, there's a few books on that.
So let me just say, if we go by the philosophical rules of thought, the three laws of thought, then the law of non-contradiction rules out contradictions by fiat. It's different in symbolic logic. Most of us who at least know some about symbolic logic know that those three laws of thought aren't at the root of symbolic logic. However, in classical symbolic logic, contradictions are still avoided, but for a different reason. and it's because of the principle of explosion. A language is no use to anyone if all statements in it can be proven true. And that is literally, you can use the rules of logic, just like algebra, to where if you get a contradiction, you can just prove whatever you want. So that destroys the language and makes it not useful to you. So there's an actual reason to avoid contradictions in classical logic.
I had a couple of the guys in the server show me how to do that, or I didn't understand the add rule. Now, like when that clicked, I was like, okay, I get it now, because I didn't understand these like natural proof rules.
Yeah. And we talked about it a while back in T-Jump server. The addition rule, you can make if you just have a proposition, you can use disjunction and add anything you want to it, and that is the gateway to being able to cause explosion. And so this is, I don't want to get too esoteric. I want people to be able to watch this, but like, and so what I'm saying is there's an actual reason for efficiency for why contradictions are excluded in classical logic. And even when they want to go and they want to build a classical logic, a logic that is peri consistent, they have to remove certain rules of inference to avoid explosion happening, so that they can keep talking about contradictions and using them without explosion happening, because a language where everything is true is no good. So again, in symbolic logic, contradictions actually have a utility-based reason why they're ruled out. Yeah. And so if we if we block off that scenario, contradictions can be useful. All right. So now what are you asking? Do I think what?
Oh, no. Actually, I agree with that. I will get back to what I was going to ask. But
I'm done now.
That's
yeah.
I always try to explain that to people when it comes to the idea of dialetheism. They think that once you start talking about it, they think that they can just say anything and it could be true as a contradiction or something like this. Like, oh, is dialetheism true and false then, or something like that? And it's like, it's saying that there could be examples or instances of contradictions. It's not saying like all contradictions are true, which is what would happen if you had explosion. But
yeah, and then let's just think about it. Like, contradictions are only useful or true nested within the framework of logic that you're talking about. So, like the first degree entailment, for example, one pair consistent logic that I like. Okay, contradictions can be true there, but they cannot be true in classical logic. Both of those are maps that are used to talk about the same territory. So what does that say about this world of phenomena that we live in? Does it mean we live in a world that permits and doesn't permit contradictions? That's what it looks like to me. So, yeah.
Yeah, or even like something crazy like, have you ever heard of ADS CFT correspondence? I know that these more like physics oriented theists, apologists will try to argue using this. Like, it's like I think Inspiring Philosophy uses it. It's like a sort of like a digital physics argument that like people use. It's from the black hole information paradox, or information loss, where
I'm not familiar with it. But yeah, I know that some of these theist YouTubers like to really put on their lab coats and talk about inspiring philosophy in particular.
It's like so it's ADS is anti-de Sitter space and CFT is conformal field theory. And one of them, so the anti-de Sitter space is three-dimensional. It's not the type of space that the universe is. It's like parallel lines diverge, basically, over infinite distances or long distances. Parallel lines will start to diverge away from each other. You can think of it that way. It's drawn as like a potato chip shape sometimes. I don't know. It's hard to explain. But then the CFT, the conformal field theory, is like the boundary of, say, like a black hole. Like, it's sort of like the event horizon of a black hole. It's this 2D like geometry. And it's where the holographic principles like come from in physics, where you can do like a one-to-one correspondence between the two theories. One of them is three-dimensional, the other one's two-dimensional. And so it's like there's two different ways of speaking about the same thing that operate on like completely different axioms or starting points for like the way the theory is being described.
I see. Yeah.
But then they have this equivalence between them. So it's like that could apply to all kinds of things that, you can fully describe something two different ways.
Yeah. Yeah, and I see what you're saying, and I don't know if this is how it always is, but like I know that physicists, at least some of them would complain about the gap between relativity and quantum mechanics, and I always thought that maybe that was less of a, I'm a non-physicist, so I don't know, but it seems like they're starting to get into certain philosophical presuppositions in that if there's something that is true, then it must be consistent in accordance with all other things that are true. And that sounds right, and it should be the case, but that's if we're thinking about things as being true. That's if we have that as a presupposition. If we are actually being pragmatists and saying these things are useful, there's no reason they need to be completely consistent with all the other things that we consider useful. And so to me, the idea that all the theories need to be bridged might be a little bit philosophically naive. Although I know not all physicists are that way, I don't see the problem in having lots of alternative and contrary tools at our disposal.
Yeah, and I think a lot of like the bridging quantum mechanics and relativity stuff, there are ways that they've done it theoretically. I think it's just that there's never been a way to really experiment on it. I think that's more what drives that. Like there's a lot of attempts at like there's like loop quantum gravity. There's a few different things. I know some of them have like inconsistencies, so they've been ruled out. But I mean, there are a lot of theories that use both together. There's like relativistic quantum field theory, which is they want to have a way of deriving gravity from quantum mechanics, or like without, because gravity is more like of a macroscopic feature, or like relativity. The features of relativity are like these macro level features that they don't have a way of deriving from a more like quantum mechanical view at the base. So there's problems that they still haven't solved yet. Like
some of them hoped to actually find like a particle, like a graviton, right?
Yeah, I mean the thing about a graviton is I believe it would be like gravitational waves are like very long wavelengths, I believe. So like I think it would just be so weak that there'd be no other particles that you could use to like interact with a single graviton or something like that.
Yeah.
It's a particle in the same way that like everything else that's a field, which is like everything, has a particle, because it's the way that the waves are interacting with the other fields that makes a perturbation in one field a particle, as opposed to just a wave, something like that.
Yeah,
it's really interesting when you can start to visualize it, like the way that it's everything sort of being locked in. Yeah, I like quantum theory, but it's pretty complicated.
Yeah. I guess with me, I consider, I don't know. I've heard so many people misrepresent quantum theory, and there's been so much woo. I guess I just gotten to where I like I don't like talking about it. I don't like hearing about it. I don't even want to read about it. But I mean, I'm not saying I don't mind talking about it when it comes up, but like, I've seen so many people, and especially YouTubers, be like, "Oh yeah, I've got quantum mechanics, and it's going to prove that this or that God exists or whatever. It's going to disprove that God exists." And I just imagine the poor physicists who've actually like done gone through all those books with the sophisticated math, and
Yeah.
they're gonna have things to say, and no one's even gonna understand what they're saying, and so they're like stuck in this small. Like, it must be so painful watching everybody grope quantum mechanics.
Right.
How come how come nobody does that with relative? How come you don't see YouTubers saying, "I'm going to use relativity to prove the existence of God"? It's always quantum mechanics. Why? You know? But is it because
I guess they do try to
vibrations
use relativity.
Yeah.
They'll just be like, the Big Bang was done by God.
Yeah.
So something like that. Yeah.
And then some of the math is so esoteric. Like, okay, they're the concepts. Okay, you can read the concepts after the physicists have done all the work and done all the math, and then turned it into a little philosophical concept for us to understand. The reality is, it's probably the math is where it's actually at. And like, if I was going to try to understand this stuff, I would go learn the math.
How much math do you know?
Let's see, it goes off in it's kind of got holes in it.
I mean, I know engineering math, so it's like, I'm not like a mathematician, but
yeah. So I know past college algebra and some degree of calculus, but not engineering math. But
I would say, like, if you take the first, like, I don't know, my college broke it into 4 calculus classes. We had shorter semesters, so I don't know if that was why, but when you start to get towards the end of calculus, like, you can start to visualize things in terms of math. And I think that gets really interesting. Like, the way that you could, like, if you understood how to program in, say, something like a program like SolidWorks, that you can draw a 3D object that's like very intricate using like mathematics, like using
SolidWorks is the program engineers use, where they make the 3D objects and they apply physical properties to it, and then it shows the red stress heating up, right? You know what I'm talking about? Like,
yeah, you can do that.
Yeah, I always thought that stuff was really cool. So I remember looking at a picture of or a video of a combustion engine with the pistons, and seeing where the stress occurred. Like, I think it would be a pretty cool job to actually work with that stuff. I don't know if that's something you do or not. I've also seen them in something like SolidWorks have a motherboard, and then showing where the different placements of the fans affected the heat. So yeah, that would be really cool stuff to do. But yeah, so I have a friend who he went into electrical engineering, and he told me all the math symbols become reappropriated at a certain point. All the things that
because in circuits, like, the components of a circuit are they're like logic gates, right? Like switches. Yeah, you can think of them all like that. So
yeah,
that's why it gets. There was somebody in the T-Jump server who was studying quantum computing, and I think he left for a while. So I don't know if he'll come back, but that would be interesting. So it's like you start to get into qubits instead of just regular transistor bits.
Yeah, and one thing I've noticed, once I learned symbolic logic, it kind of changed the way that I learned math, because then I used to sort of wing it, and it was kind of easy. It was like, oh yeah, solve the equations, whatever. But then after I learned symbolic logic, I realized, okay, first I want to learn all the postulates, all the transformations, and I want to know them, and I don't know why. I don't know. It's not the case that every math class that I've been in teaches it that way. You get the teachers teaching you their shortcuts and their kind of roundabout ways of doing stuff, whereas it could be very cut and dry. It could be, these are the postulates. This is how you transform it into the answer.
Yeah, I guess in mathematics, it's complicated because it's like there's people's solutions that have like guided mathematics like through like a history kind of like a development. So when I was learning math, a lot of the times you'd be like introduced to something and be like, okay, so and so came up with this method of doing this, the Fourier transform or whatever, like some kind of technique for solving, usually something in like a more rough way than. So there'd be some equation or a symbolism that was almost computationally like impossible to solve directly. So you'd have to come up with some way of dealing with that. And you know, you get a lot of mathematical theories out of it, and it's always fascinated me the way people come up with new notations and like just Newton inventing calculus in the first place has always kind of fascinated me. Like I want somebody to invent a new math like that.
Yeah.
I want that to become like an easy, like, what if, you know, in the future people are smart enough to be coming up with new maths like every other month or something like that? It would be fascinating.
It might be that you know, the times are different and that there's a saturation of information and theories in the different fields, and that maybe the answers have already been put forth and they need time to marinate and like actually sort of take hold.
Yeah, like and it's like nobody knows to even look for them to apply them sometimes. So
yeah, I mean, I have a friend in my server. He's another symbolic logic guy, but also a general math guy. He keeps changing his name, so I don't know what I'm supposed to call him. But he insists that category theory is kind of one of the big reconcilers of math, and he'll always say that. I don't know. He'll always talk about logic in terms of category theory. I don't know category theory, so but keeps telling me I need to learn it. Yeah,
I'd imagine it's something like set theory, but probably broader.
Yeah, it seems bigger picture, like, you know, not galaxies, like zoomed out, like supercluster type things. I don't know, but you know, it's lots of arrows, lots of spatial arrangement of capital letters and arrows, things like that. But I haven't gotten into it. There's a book he recommended to me called Conceptual Mathematics, where he says you can learn all about it. But yeah, I plan to get to it. There's a whole bunch of things that I on my plate that projects that I've started intellectually that I still need to finish. It's probably the case with most of us.
Definitely.
But yeah,
I don't know if you want to cut off like the combo for the purposes of the recording, because we've been about an hour, but it's up to you.
Yeah. All right. I usually like to recap stuff to help people sort of remember where things were going, because we did sort of ramble a little bit, but that's fine.
Yeah.
So you were saying that that based on my non-realist usage of logic and you know, abstract ideas, and my justification of it with utility, my usage of utility still has groundings or commitments in things like metaphysics. And we went in a couple different directions with that. I think everybody heard it. I think we probably understand each other. I mean, I don't think it is. I mean, I'm not going to say it. It's hard to ground things in reality. It's also hard to completely divorce things from reality. Right. This is why all I will say is that it's useful. I won't say that my ideas are completely divorced from reality, because then why would you say that you're using a map that is completely misaligned with the territory? You know, so I don't. Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah,
I think we've made it. Yeah.
To cap off my point, I'll just say, like, I agree to the extent that, like, all we really have are maps. Like, I agree with that point.
Yeah.
And I think, like, hopefully we can sort of start to discern things about what's being reflected on those maps.
Yeah. Yeah. And to me, I just think people need to know that about their maps at all times, because sometimes they get on these, they get distracted and think they're about to discover the big secret of reality, that they're about to like see the freaking boobs of reality. And then they're like, but this paradox keeps getting in the way. It's because it's a map, dude. You know? this is why reality has always been beyond our reach in a formal sense. It's because you stopped using it as a map and you thought it was gonna like open up the secrets of the universe. And so to me, it's important for people to remember this and remember that they are using something disposable. That's really the only reason I handle it that way. But this issue that I stress, I would say, is at the heart of a lot of philosophical issues. This is the only reason anyone ever claims to have some objective model of morality, or anything like that. And, which ultimately I would say is indefensible in all cases. So, yeah. Anyway, I think we both made our cases. And so, we can cap it off here.